Feeling anxious, worried, or depressed? Do you experience stress-related issues with your sleep, diet, work, or relationships? If so, you're in the company of over 1 billion people around the world whose lives are negatively affected by stress every day. And the problem is growing worse over time. And as stress feeds a host of emotional, mental, and physical issues, it's important to find easy ways to slow down and de-stress. Today, I am joined by a fascinating London-based psychotherapist and meditation expert who will offer us key insights into the art of self-healing with compassion, goodwill, and calm. Today, we'll focus on this listener's real-life question. I'm writing to you to get some help. I had some medical test results come in, and my doctor gave me 2 prescriptions. He said I need to reduce stress in my life. I told him that's ridiculous because everything in my life is stressful, from my kids to paying bills. I doubt you can help me, but my wife asked me to write in to see if you have suggestions for reducing my stress. And with that issue as the focus of today's episode, I'm Dr. Carla Marie Manley, and this is Imperfect Love. Please note, as this episode contains sensitive information, listener discretion is advised. If you need support, please see the links in the show notes.
Welcome to Imperfect Love with Dr. Carla Marie Manley, psychologist, author, and relationship expert. I'm here to help unravel mysteries and misconceptions about love, relationships, and mental health issues, plus everything in between. Love is complicated, people are imperfect, and relationships surely can be tough. Together, we'll navigate this messy, imperfect space of real life.
Today, I'm joined by a delightful special guest, Dr. Andrew Ross. Dr. Ross is a medical doctor, psychotherapist at the NHS, lecturer at the London South Bank University, and author. Dr. Ross will be sharing his expertise on meditation and healing from mental distress. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Ross. It's such a joy to have you with us today.
Thank you so much for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And before we get going and dive into this really lovely topic that I'm sure almost every listener can, connect with on some level, could you tell our listeners just a little bit about what makes you, you?
It's an interesting question, isn't it? What makes you, you? I guess it's the culmination of that kind of professional and personal experience that makes us, us. And I suppose I'm here from a professional point of view, but you can't really get away from the personal, can you? And it's really the culmination of all those different experiences building up from a childhood onwards, and that really makes us, us. And well, what makes me, me will be all of those things all kind of coming together. And, I could talk for the entire podcast about what makes me, but maybe for just say a little bit about me is that, well, I work as a psychotherapist in London, in the UK. I work in public health and I work in private practice as well. And alongside that, I do some writing as well, which is, I think, what brought me to you, which is I write about meditation and specifically for psychotherapists, for those people working in a mental health professional sort of capacity, and how meditation might help people who are psychotherapists, who are working in mental health, to be able to bring about those mindsets, bring about those ways of working in that specific way. And then I suppose personally, what makes me, me, I don't know. Maybe we'll find out a bit more by being around me. It's a bit hard to say, isn't it? I often speak to people, especially when I work with them as a psychotherapist. I work psychodynamically, which means that maybe they don't know too much about me. I don't disclose too much. And they'll say, well, I don't really know you. I don't really know you. But I'll say, well, you know how I am. And sometimes I think how someone is is probably the most important thing, more so than who they are or what they've done or, what kind of accoutrements they have around their lives, but really how they are is the most important thing. And how I am, well, I could bring lots of adjectives to describe myself in a positive light. But maybe as we go through our time together, we'll get a better idea of what that might be.
Okay, I can't help but lean into this for just a moment. So let's pretend I'm a client and I say, Dr. Ross, I don't want to know who you are. I want to know how you are. I'm just meeting you. What would you tell me? How are you?
How am I? Well, I'd like to say, well, it's there's many different ways of saying, well, how am I? I'd like to say that I'm quite calm. I'm a keen listener. I'm very interested to hear about how other people are. Um, yeah, I'd probably leave it at that. I guess if a client comes to me and they're most interested to hear about me, I would like to know where that's coming from as well. So, a lot of those things are ping pong back and forth. And I've had people who find that easy, some people who find that very difficult, but that's the nature of things. And we're always trying to kind of discover where that's coming from. So, as one person once told me, uh, you're a bit like a politician, aren't you? Which I think was a bit of an accusatory message towards me. But I think these things kind of bear out in time, and you kind of discover things about people the more time you spend with them. But in terms of my kind of clinical work, yeah, I'd like to think that I'm warm. I'm someone who's quite kind of calming in their demeanor and someone who's inviting and interested, but in a way that's quite kind of not very threatening, if you see what I mean. So it allows people to open up, even if they're struggling with things that they've never told anyone in their entire life, even if they're struggling with things that they're embarrassed or ashamed about, that I hopefully can be the type of person who they feel comfortable enough to share that without it feeling too worrying.
That's a really beautiful description. And I do get that energy from you. So that all makes sense. Now I have a question for you. Were you always calm, non-threatening, kind of this gentle, easygoing soul? Or have you done a lot of self-work to bring out that part of who you are?
I think I was as a very, very young person as a child. And then, different things happen to you when you're growing up. And I think by the time I was a younger person, some people tell me I'm still young, but maybe I'm kind of nudging into the middle aspect of my life. I think somewhere along the road things got much more difficult. And I have had periods of, deep distress, deep anguish, deep difficulties. And yes, as you hinted at, I think it's taken a lot of work and a lot of change to be able to get in back in touch. Maybe that's how I'd like to think of things, getting back in touch with how I was when I was a lot younger, with those kind of more playful aspects of myself, which can kind of get really extinguished by the kind of day to day, by the challenges that we have throughout life, and by the really difficult things that many people encounter in their lives. And to be able to move past that or move through it, it's not something that we ever leave behind us, as I often remind people I work with when they say, oh, I want to get back to how I was at XYZ time, before all these terrible things happen to us. We have to remind ourselves that those terrible things, they make us who we are. And yes, we can work through them, but we'll never get back to how we were before. So yes, having done a lot of work on myself and with others, relying on others, taking support from others, it has helped me to get to a point where, I'm working towards somewhere where I would like to be. We're never the complete product, the finished point. We're always working and changing and shifting. But I'm definitely much further along the way on that road than maybe I was, a good 15 years ago, when, things were a lot more challenging, a lot more difficult.
Thank you for being so vulnerable and honest. And I really appreciate everything you said, and particularly the part where you said that it is about getting in touch with those playful elements of the self that were extinguished when life challenges, came along. And I really love that. It reminds me of in my first book, Joy from Fear, I talk about and have talked about as I've, worked more with joy and fear over time, that we are born, this is my belief, that we are born with this joy inside of us, this little light, this little votive, and there's this light. And then life's challenges come along. People are unkind to us. We are unkind to us. Things happen. And this soot builds up around that, that glass container that the little candle of who we are is in, and that's joy in there. And then we get depressed and confused because there's more and more soot and things look dark and they feel dark and stressful. And if we learn, and I think this is for me the healing journey, as we learn to wipe off that soot, to notice that it's there, to wipe off the soot, the hurt, the sometimes cruelty that's occurred, all of those things, the resentment, and learn to do that as a practice, whether we use meditation, which I think is a really important practice. So I'd love to talk more about that in just a moment. But I do think that practice, whatever someone finds, whether it's psychotherapy, meditation, combination, journaling, practices that help you remove the soot to, as you say, get back to that part of you or parts, those playful parts, those joy-filled parts that were there before. Sometimes brutal challenges affect that core. What do you think?
If you spend much time with babies, then you can really see that, very young babies. And part of my training was an infant observation where, one went once a week to observe, usually mother, but whoever's caring for baby for an entire year, and you see how that baby grows and changes. And sometimes something that I like to do when I work with people who potentially can exhibit quite challenging behaviors, maybe in kind of more forensic kind of environments, or whatever that challenging behavior, maybe aggressive or whatever it might be, is sometimes when it can be hard to get in touch with that compassion towards somebody, is to imagine, well, they were babies once. And you can think of them as a baby and mother or whoever their caregiver's arms, and that kind of very innocent, pure sort of moment very, very early on, just before they start, with all the difficulties that everyone has to grapple with as a baby and onwards. But that we were all babies once, and how beautiful and how important that is, and how it maybe helps to kind of brush off some of that soot that you just mentioned, and helps you to maybe get in touch and brings in the possibility of being compassionate towards and with someone who it might be quite challenging to be around, and just to remind ourselves of where we have all come from.
Thank you for focusing on that. And I think that's so important because that's, that really intersects with parts work. I don't know if that's a thing in the UK as much as it can be here, where that idea we do have these different parts in the self and that they all play a part. And sometimes the part that they're playing can, it's trying to protect us, it's trying to defend us, but it gets big and can be scary and harmful. So learning to work with those parts and allow them to not take over the personality, to know that they have different capacities now to handle life's stressors, that there are other parts. And so I would really love if we can just take a pivot now. I do have a question for you before we pivot back to the listener's question. Yeah. When you were talking about the forensic situations that you're working in, can you say more? It sounded like you often see a lot of aggression in that setting.
Perhaps not so much sometimes forensic, and I've worked in prisons and things like that in kind of previous work before I was a psychotherapist, but in that kind of mental health environment. But maybe I was thinking as you said, alongside aggression. And I work with people on a daily basis who reach points in their lives where they would like to end their life, or they think that they would like to end their life. They're kind of in suicidal states of mind or pre-suicidal states of mind. And that is a very aggressive state. We might not think of it because it's not being, aggressive towards others, but the idea that you would like to end your life, or you wish to hurt yourself, self-injure in a particularly significant way, there's a lot of aggression there. And perhaps that aggression isn't turned outwards, it's definitely turned inwards. And to be able to speak to someone around that, one has to speak in a really specific way, in a way that's warm enough, in a way that's but also straight enough to talk specifically towards it. People often might think that speaking directly about suicide, oh, well, that's going to, encourage someone or inspire them to take action.
Mm.
But as we know, it's very much the opposite. And the more that we can speak about those more, well, aggressive states of mind or challenging states of mind that people are going through, the more we can help to kind of calm down and to reduce that risk and to reduce those ideas, so that people will have different ideas about suicide, different ideas about aggression. You might hear that someone, well, I want to end my life. But what's really underlying that? What are they really thinking about? What are the ideas they have? And it might be something about, well, actually, I want to end feeling like this, or actually, I want support, but I don't really know quite how to get that. And if I do this, then something else might happen. Or I might want to join someone else who's died recently. And I think if I die, then I will join them. Or really, I have a lot of hatred towards someone and I'll really get back at them if I end my life. And they might not consciously be thinking of these ideas, but they might be kind of very deep underlying this kind of siren which is sounding, which is, I want to end my life. I want to do something very aggressive towards myself. But by getting in touch with those underlying aspects that might be outside of our awareness, it really helps to kind of open things up, open conversations around aggression, open conversations around anger, open conversations around things that might have been done to someone, and really help people to move away from that state of mind in a very different way than maybe, well, let's not talk about this, or, oh, you're already wrong to think that, or many of the other kind of stigma loaded statements that really are pushed by society and just by kind of historical reasons, generally speaking.
Thank you. And I really appreciate that we're talking about this topic and the importance of being able to have conversations. And it's somehow connected to the listeners, the inquiry that we're focusing on today. But before I really dive into that connection, which is simply that I appreciate that this individual chose to reach out, pressed to do so by the partner or not, being able to start a conversation. And especially in those darker areas, those very lonely areas, such as suicidality, serious depression, chronic anxiety, those issues can be, and the deep, deep stress, sometimes getting a medical diagnosis, feeling like, oh my God, and it sounds now here where the listener question is that, oh my gosh, I have this stress-filled life. I don't see a way out. How am I supposed to reduce stress when I don't have any other way out? This is my life. And that's a pattern with often most mental health issues, where the person doesn't see a way out and they're afraid to talk about it. I know in the US, I don't know if it's the same in England. I know that the NHS is very challenged in many ways, but if you can't afford ongoing mental health support, you're often out in the cold. I had somebody reach out to me the other day that said, if they're not having a serious crisis, and I know what their healthcare provider system is, I know this, I hear this a lot, they cannot get the ongoing psychotherapy that they need and deserve in order to keep stress reduction going, to keep issues like what we're talking about with suicidality at bay. Instead, they wait for the crisis and then try to lean into it instead of getting ahead of it. Is it much like that in the UK right now, or are they more leaning into prevention?
I mean, it's a difficult environment, and things have been degraded much over the last few decades, and there's a high threshold for getting support. So the kinds of people that I see, perhaps I would have seen people who were maybe under less pressure a long time ago, and the wider challenges, wider economic issues, huge social changes that are around and coming, much like in the US, and all the other social challenges that are around economically, other social challenges like racism, classism, all these kind of things that are so prevalent, all kind of feed into this. And yeah, it's a very challenging environment to be in, such that people rely on ways of coping that are ways that kind of have been used for generations, be that drugs and alcohol or managing things by not talking about them. And, I'm mindful of your kind of vignette that you started off with. And, maybe it's just me being heteronormative, but wondering whether the person speaking about is male, and how hard it can be for men to be able to talk about how they're feeling, not just due to it being difficult, but just because of those other social aspects that dampen down, that add stigma, that made people think that talking about how you're feeling is not the thing to do, that one should kind of plow on, keep going, not address any of that, and the huge weight that has on so many people of all genders, but I think especially so for men.
Absolutely. And I think it's when I'm working or with a male client, or somebody reaches out to me with a question where it's obvious that they're coming from a place of, I feel broken because I am reaching out for support. I am so appreciative of the courage it takes for, regardless of gender, but I agree with you that men are particularly impacted by the messages that say real men, strong men don't need support, strong men don't cry, strong men don't feel. And my goodness, let's get past that. People of all genders have stress, they have internal pain, internal distress, and it takes great courage to break out of that box and say, I deserve support. I want support. I'm going to reach out for support. And I find that so wonderful. I applaud it, because that person's not only impacting their life, but the life, if they have a partner or a family or kiddos. The more we do our work, the more we become that source of change and momentum that the world needs. So questions like this, I absolutely love, because it gives us a starting place to spread more information about how normal it is to feel stressed, how many people are feeling stressed, challenged, anxious, depressed, and that there are ways, something as, which we'll segue into as soon as you're ready, as pure and available as meditation to use to start to combat the stress. And even for someone like our listener who sounds like they work tirelessly and try to manage a lot. And I get how difficult that can be. I've been there. Sometimes I am there. And knowing that making time to meditate, to journal, to engage in doses of self-care, if you can do that for even a few minutes every day, it will bring down those stress hormones. It will help you be more present, sleep better. So you know far more about this than I do. So I'm going to give the ball to you, Dr. Ross.
I mean, it's such a wide topic, isn't it? And when people ask me, and I do work in a particular way with people, but sometimes and often they will ask me, well, what can I do? And I'm not the kind of therapist that necessarily gives people things to do. It's more like, well, we're doing it right now. We're doing it together. It's through the talking. But when people do ask me, there's a whole range of practices, from those kind of breathing exercises, or people might call it breath work, which is kind of a bit of a buzzword now for breathing exercises or breathing meditations, short things that you can do. But that actually they're immensely powerful for that moment when or if you're feeling very panicked or anxious. And I do it, I am not much of a fan of talking in front of large audiences. Point me towards whoever is, and I might question them a little bit about that. But feeling anxious about that, heart rate goes up, blood pressure goes up, the worries and the thoughts whizzing around. But how effective to be able to take a deep breath in, and then a slow breath out through the nose, do that a few times. And it just taps into, for a number of different reasons, into various physiological, neurological, psychological pathways to just calm things down a lot. Or to kind of do something called box breathing, which I love to do, but also I focus in on a physical thing in the room, and it's a grounding process. It brings you back into the room, back into your body, and away from, wherever your mind's gone off to about whatever it's worrying about, wherever it's going off to. And simple, relatively simple sounding breathwork exercises that you can kind of drill. I always tell people, try it when you're okay. And then when you're feeling worried, wherever you are, even if you're on the bus or whatever you might be doing, no one will know you're doing it because no one can see you taking a few breaths in and out. But it can be immensely effective in that moment to help with panic. And then we go all the way off to the other end of the spectrum to, sitting somewhere in a specific place for a specific kind of purpose for a much more longer period of time and really immersing yourself in something which is much more deep and much more kind of poignant and focused. And it's a very different experience, an experience of self-discovery, an experience of greater understanding of reality, really, but also of just what your mind's up to and how it's going, and a real kind of introspective moment where you can really see what your mind's up to, less reactivity. You can notice yourself really feeling angry or feeling upset or feeling joyful or feeling relaxed. Say I'm thinking back to earlier this week, and have been having a really stressful period of time, had some time on Tuesday, I think it was, a bit of time to myself, a bit of time to do some exercise, and then to sit for, I think it was about half an hour, which was a real gift to myself. It felt like a real moment to be able to sit for a kind of longer period of time rather than grabbing moments here and there, moments of mindfulness, moments of breath work to just kind of, keep yourself on a level, but a real period of time to really immerse myself, a bit like a kind of long bath or a deep swim in that mode of awareness where one can really kind of feel a lot more calm, generate a sense of deep awareness within the body and in the mind and in the feelings, and really use that to just kind of calm things down. And I emerged, in that state where I'm like, oh, why aren't I doing this every single day? And, maybe tomorrow I'll meditate for an hour, and life gets in the way and other things get in the way. But that difference between, the longer term kind of lengthy practice that one might be able to do, but then also those moments where we can tap back into that, kind of know that we've been in that kind of deep immersive bath, but be able to kind of drop back into that just for a moment and notice and be able to kind of taste that again in those times of that kind of deep sigh or the box breathing. It's there, and if we practice enough in the longer periods of time, then we can kind of dip back into that. But it's a life's work, or many lives' work, and it's that kind of maybe gives you a bit of a taste of how I kind of try and integrate it as I can.
Thank you. And that's all very beautiful and vulnerable for you to share that part of your life with us. And when you talk about box breathing, I actually describe that in my first book, Joy from Fear. So if you would please walk us through just a gentle glimpse of what that looks like in just a moment. But I also want to thank you because this really fits with the issue of the day, that idea that here you are, very busy. I also know that you have a new or newish little one on your hands. So your life is very full, very busy. You juggle a lot. And so you're sharing with us, which I appreciate, that you too face times where you're stressed, where there's a lot on your plate, where there's a lot going on. And the idea of finding that 30 minutes for a seated meditation, which I agree, sometimes it's like, oh, how can I even find 10 minutes, right? How can I find 10 minutes? And yet you also go to the other end where you say, box breathing, whether you're on a bus, whether you're in traffic, waiting in a traffic snarl, whether you're in an airport, whether you're in line. It's something you can do if you're in line at the grocery store or waiting at the doctor's office, learning some of these breathing techniques. And some people think it's just woo-woo, but they're not. They really work. You're regulating your nervous system. You're telling it, I don't have to be in stress mode right now. I can actually just be here in the present. So would you describe, please, Dr. Ross, would you describe box breathing for us?
Yeah, of course. So we imagine a box or a square or a rectangle. And I like to do box breathing whereby, as I said, we kind of integrate it into our environment as well. So it really grounds us of where we are. It's particularly effective for people who are feeling quite panicked. So we can either do it with our eyes closed, or I like to describe to people to do it with their eyes open. And we kind of think, well, where can we see a box or a square or a rectangle? And there are many rectangles around, unless we're in the middle of a rainforest, even if it's the back of your phone or a window or a door or wherever it is. And the way that it works is breathing through the nose, because breathing through the nose, from lots of reasons, is just generally more effective at calming ourselves down. Is if we can see a box or a square or a rectangle in front of us, or we can just imagine one, is we start with our eyes at the bottom left of that. And then we kind of follow it round from bottom left to top left in a clockwise fashion, and to top right and bottom right, and then back to the beginning. But at each corner, we do something different with our breath, and we slowly work our way round. So we start off in the bottom left, and then slowly we take a deep breath in through our nose as we bring our eyesight to the top left. And then we hold that breath in without breathing out for another kind of 4 seconds as we bring our eyesight to the top right. And then we breathe all the way out through our nose as we bring our eyesight to the bottom right, nice and slowly. And then when all that breath has gone, we hold our breath out before breathing in as we bring our sight to the bottom left. And then what do we know? We're back to the beginning again, and we go back round the square all again, but each time trying to go slower and slower, because we're trying to slow down our breathing, which in turn slows down our mind and helps to calm down our feelings. And by integrating that with our environment, it really helps to bring us back down to earth, away from those worries, away from that panic. And then lo and behold, everything is nice and calmed down before we can get off that bus or back out of that traffic jam before we hit that road rage again.
Thank you. I love your version. I was doing it as you were talking, and I just got this lovely sense of solidness, of really feeling grounded. And that was only with one pass. So that listeners, when you're in a safe place, give that one a try. And safe can be in a supermarket line while you're looking at the box in front of you, can, or that wouldn't be a can. Anyway, look for a box. Maybe it's the window.
Well, a can from that perspective is still a rectangle. But I always encourage people, do it when you're feeling all right. Practice it a few times so that when you're not feeling all right, then it's in your muscle memory, in your mind. And many people will actually do that practice as their meditation. So once a day, 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes a day, they'll just do box breathing. And that's sufficient for them as an entire practice, that they will just do that. And as simple as it might sound, it can be just very soothing and just help to focus things for those 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, and just be very effective. And I know people all around the world in all different environments use it, I think, because of its simplicity and its effectiveness.
Absolutely. And I love how the way you describe it really focuses on the visual element, because that brings you deeper into the experience. And I think that's so important. And if we take it to our listener, or for any person who is saying, I don't know where I'm going to find the time for this, I don't even have 3 seconds yet. If we pause to think of those moments in our lives, we're waiting for a cup of coffee to brew. We are, waiting for a cup of coffee to be made for us at a coffee go-to place. If we are, again, waiting at a doctor's office, we are waiting for a prescription to be filled. We are waiting to pick up our kids from school. All of those places where you actually might instead turn to your phone and keep yourself distracted or busy with your phone. Instead, I can imagine turning the phone upside, over, so you're not seeing its face, and using that as your visual rectangle to prompt you to because so many people have their phones at the ready all the time. So instead of engaging with it, turn it over and use that as your box.
The phone is a horrible distraction, and it makes me think of actually, I do the same, and you reach for your phone just automatically almost, and in my pocket attached to my keys, because I'm Buddhist, but it could be anything really. There's a tiny little Buddha statue attached to my keychain, and when I go in for my phone, conveniently or by design, I might hit that on my way in, feel it, notice it and then realize not to grab my phone. And sometimes we just need those little cues. And that's a really lovely cue to, yeah, turn the phone around the other side, and definitely going to steal that one as a means to, yeah, to be able to do that. And yes, we might have a more in-depth practice, and that's fantastic. But I think the key is to be able to tap into that. You know, there's the idea that, oh, we're always breathing, so then we can always meditate. And that might sound a bit silly, and sometimes it can sound that way. But actually, yeah, there are these moments when you're waiting in a queue. And yeah, if we grab our phone, it's just a distraction, and it's going to feed into that kind of dopamine reward sort of
Oh,
hunger addiction cycle. And we all do it, and we're all stuck in it. But actually, we can flip that a little bit. And if this is one of the ways that we can do that, then so be it. And it can be a good way to do that.
absolutely. And I really love that you talked, briefly touched on the reward system, because sometimes we think we are broken, that we are now stuck in this cycle and we can't get out of it. Yet it's one of the beauties of our brains, neuroplasticity, that if
Mm.
we, whatever habits you have, for as long as you've been doing them, they've been hardwired that way for that many years. So if you start a new pattern and you forget to breathe, that's okay. It's just not hardwired in yet. And I love, Dr. Ross, how you said you have that reminder of the um, little Buddhist statue on your keychain. I know my screensaver is a reminder. It's a reminder. I created it that reminds me to drop into a place of love and presence.
Mm.
So before I even open my phone, I'm seeing that. But after our discussion today, I'm going to get some sort of decal or something for the back of my phone to remind me, maybe just like a little peace emblem or something, because it's often those visual cues that remind us to either be present, or, which our phones are known for, they remind us to be distracting. That is what they're
Mm.
designed to do. We're designed to get drawn in and stay and watch and do and compare and think that we're not enough and we're not doing enough. And oh my goodness, then it costs more stress. So I have other people do my social media because I don't enjoy it.
Well, yeah, it's interesting how you describe, remembering and reminding yourself, because really the original idea of mindfulness is simply remembering to keep your mind on something. That's what it was before kind of a lot got layered on. So the idea that you could kind of remember to keep your attention on something, that's mindfulness. And that's the main part of meditation, is our mind wanders off and we remember to bring our minds back to it, and how important that might be.
I know that a big piece of the work that you do helps people create stronger self awareness, how you work with teaching psychotherapists how to bring meditation in, because psychotherapists are ultimately, we're models. Anytime we are in a helping profession, a healing profession, we are models. Not that we intend to be models, but what we do is a model for other people. And so the more present we are able to be for the self, for clients, the more we're able to connect in that really authentic, calm way. Because one of the things I often hear from people during sessions is they'll say, oh, I went to see my doctor. My doctor was really aggressive or really busy or really inattentive. Or my parent or somebody in my life, my boss was really busy or, distracted, and their energy was very stressful. We forget how important it is to be role models for ourselves. Try to create that sense of inner calm and ease. And that, as you said earlier, which I thought was beautiful, and I so agree, that all of this is a lifelong practice. Just like it's one of the reasons I love my yoga practice. It is a practice. It is not a perfect. Some days it will be smoother and more, natural than other days. Other days it will. That's how life is. That's how mindfulness is. That's how stress management is. Some days will do better than other days, but the goal is to keep working toward that place where we have more breathing, more presence, more calm, more compassion. And when we do that, we make naturally less space for the more disruptive and dysregulating habits. What do you think?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, for me, meditation alongside the psychotherapy that I've had myself as part of my training and as just generally part of my life, and alongside the personal relationships I have, the three of those things have been the most important aspects in making me how I am, and often encourage people to take up a meditation practice. The other two are, much more kind of socially acceptable and acceptable to do. Meditation still, even though it has the kind of mindfulness idea around it, I think still seen as a bit of an unusual thing, especially for, psychotherapists or any kind of mental health professionals, psychologists or psychiatrists to take up and to practice. But in terms of personal development, it's really very much holding a mirror up to yourself, a way to really work on a very core kind of facet of self discovery. And for that reason, I think that, as you really put very well, it's a really important thing to be able to develop and to be able to work on.
And thank you. I mean, you're offering so much wisdom. And one of my goals is to help normalize how to normalize how important basic strategies like mindful breath work, meditation, that they don't have to have necessarily a religious or spiritual connection. They can simply be seen as a way to, for me, mine tends to be more spiritual as well as health oriented. But when we see it as a way of staying present, of reducing stress, and I found ways, I know when I go on my morning, the first segment of my walk or run is spent entirely doing the loving kindness meditation. And it keeps me in the present, and I'm really feeling it. And that feels very restorative to me and very grounding for me. And I'm not seated. I'm obviously moving at quite a clip, but it's still for anyone who wants to find pockets. You can be really meditative, not meditating, but meditative when you're raking leaves, when you're gardening. For me, if I love cleaning things like house cleaning, and I can get into a real zone, even though I don't have much time for it, and get into a real zone where I'm not doing it from a stressed place, but a calm place. And when we work on that, do you think that practices like that can be de-stressing in the short term and long term?
Yes, I think so. There are so many practices, as you said, which incorporate that mindfulness, remembering where to focus your attention on. I think, as well as that, I think there's a balance to be had, to do that, which I think is fantastic, but also to have that kind of more formal space of sitting practice. I think if one only has one or the other, if, say, you sit for 5, 10 hours a day, but then you don't bring those lessons into your everyday life. But then the other way around, if you're always in your everyday life trying to maintain that awareness the whole time, which some practices do, and then you don't have that kind of more formal space. There's the idea of formal meditation. It's a bit like driving a car around a parking lot, a car park, and trying to learn how to drive there. You could become the best parallel parker in the world in a empty parking lot, but then try to do that in a perfectly full one where someone else has their car just down the road, and vice versa. One has to have balance with both those kinds of practice. And I think that's something to be said about, those more deeper moments of longer practice when you kind of could be sitting, but also to take that into your everyday life, whether that's you going on a jog, raking leaves, or waiting in a never-ending, interminable queue line in the supermarket and waiting for the next person in line to be finished with their work. And you can feel the anger and the frustration growing. That's a very different environment, and one which can be, very fruitful practice. So I think, keeping those two things, those two kind of ideas in balance there's always a kind of path through that.
I love the image of the parking lot where being able to do meditation in this one space, that's important, but also being able to have that part of real life where you're out driving the streets as well, and being able to work the calmness and the ease and the meditation aspect in those areas. And when we look back to the listener's question, and I think for a moment of my husband, where he's stress prone, and when he's at work, he finds it difficult to slow down. And so I gave him this was years ago, I gave him some like essential lavender, some essential oil, and I gave him a little reminder that it was okay to close his office door just for 5 minutes and just sit there and breathe. Now, I don't think he made it a practice, but he saw that it was possible. And so when we start things like that, that we can see as, oh, maybe it would look odd to people that my office's door is shut and it says meditation in progress or whatever it says. That might seem odd to other people, whatever. But what other people find odd, that's okay. What's most important is that what you're doing brings the reset to your life. And when I'm thinking of this listener, he can even do maybe some resets when the kids are doing homework, or teach the kids to do some breathing exercises with him where they can sit on the floor and have just 5 minutes together. Kids love exercises like breathing exercises. They love doing things with mommy and daddy. And if you're able to create those little pockets in a family environment, then the parts of life that you can't control, like how much your job is paying you or that the bills are going to come. But I think you then can approach them from a far more centered way. How stressed we are isn't going to change the bills that are coming, but it will certainly impact how we can deal with the bills that come and the stressors that do come. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we actually have very little control about our external environment a lot of the time. But as you said, it's not so much about that. Ultimately, it's about how we react to it. And if our minds are more capable, then we can respond to that. The idea of that metaphor of kind of salt in a cup of water. Yes. The salt will still be there, but if we can increase the capacity of the water, make the cup much more bigger, then the salt will be less concentrated and we'll be able to kind of cope with that better. And if we can just increase the size of that water, of that capacity, then, to an extent, depending on the bills and the environment, whatever it is, will help us to manage it more effectively.
And, our health, if we're taking care of it with practices like mindfulness, meditation, then we're around a lot longer and in far better health to be with the kiddos and the other loved ones in our lives. So it's really a win-win. It's a win-win if we can take some of these practices and incorporate them step by step, day by day. And I also, just as we're winding up, that I really appreciate that quite a few times you focused on the importance of communication, of supportive relationships, and the power of those to be de-stressing, anchoring forces in life. And so I really appreciate that you brought that up and remind listeners that even if you can't access or afford psychotherapy, individual, finding places online, finding community groups, friends, where you're safe to talk about your feelings. You're safe to talk about what's going on for you. You're safe to be heard and not judged for whatever's happening. That is so good for the body, mind, and spirit. That kind of connection is so good. And if I could offer that listener anything, as well as the mindfulness and the breathing, I would encourage that support and connection and communication that you're talking about, Dr. Ross.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Gala.
Well, thank you. Are there any other final pieces that you would like to offer to our listeners today?
Not that I can think of. I think the conversation has been very well guided and we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have covered a lot of ground, and I so appreciate everything that you've brought today. I know there's so much more, but it is late where you are, and I'm cognizant of that. So thank you. Thank you. Where can our listeners find you?
So my website, arospsychotherapy.com. That's Aros, Ross Sierra. And then they can see my book, Meditation for Psychotherapists, if that way inclined. But yeah, all the information is there.
I have just one last question. Your book on meditation, could someone who's not a psychotherapist find it engaging and informative?
I think it's very much directed to kind of mental health professionals. So anyone who's a psychotherapist, psychologist, psychiatrist, or someone who's very interested in meditation or works in the kind of mental health caring professions, I think they'd be get the most out of it. Your everyday layperson, there are so many titles and so many places that they can go to that I think they'd get a lot more effective reading from.
Well, I appreciate that. And I know there are a lot of mental health professionals out there, as you said, of all types. And whether, whatever your environment is, it's so important to be able to learn to engage in practices that are self-care oriented, like meditation, so that then you can be present for the people that you're there to help and support throughout life. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And listeners, if you don't have a pen handy, don't worry. Dr. Ross's information, links to his website, to his book will all be in the show notes, so you'll be able to find him quite easily. And Dr. Ross, thank you once again for sharing your time and energy and for staying up late to be with us today.
Well, thank you very much. And I'd love to come back at any time. It'd be great to speak some more.
That would be wonderful. Thank you, thank you. And to our listeners, as always, I am so grateful for your time and energy and for you being on this journey of love and life with us. And this is Imperfect Love.
Thanks so much for sharing your time with me today. Remember, you have the power to transform your life and love fearlessly, if imperfectly, and it's my privilege to help you along the way. You can find more life-changing content, including my books and other podcast episodes, at drcarlamanley.com. Feel free to submit your own confidential questions through my website. I'll do my very best to include your issue on a future episode. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Until we connect again, this is Dr. Carla Marie Manley wishing you oceans of blessings and love. Please note, this podcast is psychoeducational in nature and is not intended to replace formal mental health support. Please contact your healthcare provider or emergency hotline if you need psychiatric care. And, as always, please take good care of your amazing, wonderful self.